The wind howled across the prairie with a fury Clara hadn't expected when she'd taken her horse out for a quick ride that afternoon. What started as a gentle drizzle had turned within minutes into a downpour so fierce it chased her straight across the open fields toward the only shelter in sight, the Maddox barn. By the time she reached the wide wooden doors, the rain was falling in relentless sheets, soaking her jacket, her skirt, her hair, even the saddle. Her boots squelched when she swung down from her horse, and she barely managed to guide him inside before the storm lashed at her again. The moment the doors slammed shut behind her, the thunder outside cracked like a whip, shaking dust from the rafters. Clara leaned back against the doors, panting, drenched through and chilled to her core. Water dripped from the ends of her hair, falling in little puddles by her feet. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to trap what little warmth she had left. Her breath came out in uneven clouds. She had no idea the rancher was inside, from the shadows near the far stall. A figure stepped forward slowly, the lantern he carried glowing gold through the barn's dimness. Clay Maddox paused mid-stride when he saw her, the light catching his eyes, his unshaven jaw, and the droplets clinging to the brim of his hat. "Well," he drawled, his voice rough and warm in the cold air. "You're getting me all wet just looking at you standing there like that." It was the kind of line he said without thinking. Half tease, half honest observation, but it hit her all the same. Heat rushed to her cheeks, absurd considering she was freezing. She tried to gather herself, brushing soaked hair from her face. "Clay, the storm came out of nowhere. I didn't think it'd get this bad." "You didn't think?" he echoed, stepping closer. "That you'd end up wandering straight into my barn looking like a rained-out kitten?" She pressed her lips together, both embarrassed and oddly flustered. "I didn't want to be out there." "The wind's awful." "It is." He lifted the lantern slightly, eyes scanning her soaked clothes. "And so is standing there shivering like that." She inhaled sharply at his tone, firm, concerned, unpretentious. The barn was cool and quiet, except for the faint rustle of the horses and the distant roar of the storm. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he crossed the distance between them slowly, like he didn't want to startle her. "You're freezing," he said, not as a guess but a simple fact. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook, his brow arched skeptically. "Clara, I can hear your teeth chattering." She closed her mouth quickly, annoyed that he'd caught it. "It's just the rain. And the wind. And you not wearing anything warm enough for weather like this." He blew out a slow breath, half amused, half irritated. "Come here." He didn't take her hand, not yet. He simply stepped aside and waited, leaving the choice to her. Something about that small consideration, so casual, yet so thoughtful, made her chest tighten in a way she didn't understand. She hesitated only a moment before pushing away from the doors. As she walked toward him, the lantern's glow grew stronger, brushing warmth across her chilled face. Clay didn't speak as he led her toward the cast-iron stove in the corner, where faint red coals pulsed like a heart trying to stay alive. As soon as they reached the stove, a wave of heat hit her, wrapping around her skin. She closed her eyes instinctively, letting herself lean into the warmth. Clay watched her closely, jaw working as if he were thinking several things and choosing none of them. He set the lantern on a hook, then unhooked the thick wool blanket hanging over the nearest beam. He held it up between them. "Turn around." Her breath hitched, not out of fear, just surprise. "Clay." "Darlin'," he said gently, the words slipping out before he could catch it. "I ain't a skin to do nothin' improper. You're soaked through and shiverin'. Let me help." The softness in his voice eased something inside her. She turned slowly, water still dripping down her back. Clay moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat of his body behind her. He draped the blanket around her shoulders with a slow, deliberate motion, careful that the rough wool didn't scratch her skin. His fingers brushed the fabric near her collarbone, adjusting it until he was satisfied it wrapped her snugly. "There," he murmured. "Better?" "A little," she whispered, but her shivering hadn't stopped. The storm had stolen too much warmth too fast. Clay noticed immediately. Without a word, he grabbed a handful of kindling, fed it into the stove, and coaxed the fire back to life. Sparks rose, glowing as they caught the embers. Within minutes, flames flickered brightly behind the iron grate, pushing warmth into the chilly barn. Clara sat on a bale of hay near the stove. Clay knelt in front of her, reaching toward her boots. She tensed. "Clay, what are you doing? Your boots are soaked." He touched the leather gently. "If you keep 'em on, they'll freeze your feet clean through? I can take them off myself. I know you can." His voice softened. "But your hands are shacking too much for the buckles." She looked down. He was right. She hadn't noticed it, but her fingers trembled beneath the blanket. When she nodded, he worked slowly, carefully, loosening the buckles and easing the boots off without tugging too hard. Her damp socks steamed slightly in the new heat of the fire. "There we go." He placed the boots near the stove to dry. "Your feet'll warm faster now." She watched him as he stood again, brushing dust from his knees. He seemed suddenly aware that he'd knelt in front of her for longer than most men would. He cleared his throat and stepped back, but she was still shivering. Clay let out a quiet sigh, gentle, resigned, protective. "Still cold? Maybe a little." He studied her for a moment. She could almost see the thoughts moving behind his eyes. Then, as if he'd made a decision, he walked behind her bale of hay and dragged over another one. Placing it close enough that their knees would almost touch, he sat, leaned back slightly, and opened his arms, not wide, not boldly, but enough to show the offer without pressure. "Come here." Her heartbeat faltered. "Clay, I ain't gonna bite you," he said, voice a low rumble under the storm's roar. "You're cold, Clara, and even a stove can't warm someone soaked through as fast as another person can. You want to warm up quicker? This'll help." She stared at him, the blanket still wrapped around her like a cocoon. His expression wasn't teasing anymore. It wasn't flirtatious either. It held something gentler, steadier. Something she wasn't prepared for. "I just want you warm," he added. "That's all." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the storm hammering at the walls. Finally, she exhaled and moved toward him, slow, hesitant, but trusting he didn't pull her. Didn't rush her. He simply waited until she settled beside him, their shoulders brushing through the blanket. When she shivered again, he shifted just enough to let her lean against his side. The warmth hit her immediately. His body radiated heat like the stove, steady and strong. His breath was warm against her temple. His arm came around her only after she leaned closer, and even then his touch was gentle, careful to make sure she could pull away if she wanted. "You feel that?" he murmured. She nodded, eyes drifting closed. She could smell leather, cedar, and rain on him. She could feel the slow rise and fall of his chest. "The storm can rage all it wants," he said quietly. "I ain't letting it get to you." Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket as she breathed him in, steadying, grounding. "Clay, why are you always like this?" He huffed a small, rueful laugh. "Like what?" "So—" She searched for the word. "Protective." His eyes softened. "Because you don't protect yourself half as much as you should." "That's not true," she said, though the protest was weak. "Darlin', you rode out into a storm dressed for spring." His thumb brushed the edge of the blanket, not her skin, never her skin. "You march into danger like you expected to move out of your way?" She should have been annoyed at that. Instead, she smiled faintly. "And you think you're the one who has to stop me?" "I think," he said slowly, voice deepening, "that I'd warm you 1,000 times over if it meant you'd stop shivering like this." Her breath caught, not because of the words, but because of the honesty in them. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't trying to win anything from her. He meant every word. Thunder cracked again, shaking the barn. Clara startled, but Clay's arm tightened slightly around her, not a squeeze. "Just a steadying touch. You're safe," he said simply. She swallowed. "Clay? Yeah? You can stay like this. How long?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "As long as you want." His breath left him in a warm rush, like he'd been holding it without realizing. Then he settled more securely beside her, leaning just enough that she felt surrounded, not trapped. Just held in a warm, solid presence that quieted every tremor outside. The storm raged on, but its fury felt distant now. The barn felt smaller, warmer, safer, the kind of place storms couldn't reach and cold couldn't bite. And in that quiet, golden pocket of warmth, pressed gently against the rancher who seemed built to steady storms both outside and inside her, Clara realized something she hadn't before. Warmth could come from more than fire. It could come from someone who knew exactly how to hold a moment still, how to keep fear at bay with nothing but calm breath and quiet strength. Clay? She whispered. He hummed, low and warm. You really weren't planning on moving, were you? No, he said, resting his cheek lightly against her hair. Not unless you told me to. She didn't, and for the first time that day she didn't feel cold at all.